Test 1, 2, 3. Hello, 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 hello.
Dr. Ki Beng, he sent his apologies because he has some migraines this afternoon after lunch. So I will replace him as the moderator. That invites our authors and to discussion on the stage. In September 1998, Anwar Ibrahim was a political prisoner with a blackened eye. In November 2022, he became the prime minister after outmaneuvering his influential ethno-religious opponent through a parlous condition of Malay politics. He had disdained comfortable irrelevance to rouse indignant masses against the regime of 5 prime ministers who rule structures which fuse state party and class power. Anwar's transformation in the 21st century relied on anti-corruption campaigns that use his charismatic personality and his complex ideas on Islam, a humane economy, coalition politics, and a reimagination of society. Now he leads a large unity government coalition of which the deposed political hegemon UMNO is only a subordinate partner. Using biography, histories, and politics, this book explores a tenacious but hopeful Anwar seeks to transform society at an unsteady moment of Malaysian politics. Let me introduce the author of the books that doesn't need my introduction. He actually was my professor during my master's degree in USM. Dr. Kubutek is Professor Emeritus, the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Tokyo, and Research Fellow Emeritus, the Institute of Developing Economies, Chiba, Japan. Besides this book, he is also the author of The Making of Anwar Ibrahim's Humane Economy, The Unrealized Mahathir Anwar Transition, Social Divide and Political Consequences, and Malay Politics, Parlous Condition, Continuing Problem, as well as various other prominent books on Malaysia's political sphere. Now I would like to invite Dr. Kubutek to give a talk.
I'm very much honored by your kind presence here for this book launch. I'm especially happy to see many familiar faces, including people who came up to say that we met 15 years ago in USM and so on, of which I actually have very little memory. This is the second launch of Anwar Ibrahim, Tenacious in Dissent and Hopeful in Power. And the first one was held in Kuala Lumpur in January. We have had to delay this launch here for a while because of the various cultural and religious events and celebrations that took place between January and roughly April. And but I'm very happy to be here, and it is a memorable occasion for me to be at this launch since it's being held in my hometown. Please allow me to talk about not so much the book itself, because for those of you who already have the book, you only have to read it. For those of you who don't have the book, I don't have the time to be able to give you a quick, presse of the book. I mean, it is really too much to get into all the different things. I will say a few things here and there, but I will probably say things that are somewhat connected to the book, but not directly, they do not directly address the contents. Let me instead talk about a few questions. Right? The first question that has been addressed to me quite often since I wrote the book was this. It's a very simple question, but it is not that easy to answer. How did you come to write on Anwar Ibrahim. Okay? In the preface of my book, I have explained to some detail the circumstances and the reasons which surrounded this actual writing of the book. It has taken quite a while, but I can't say that, I had been writing all this while, because I was working for all the years that I was trying to write, at least until, I returned to Malaysia, to Penang in 2020, and then, we had the lockdown. Right? I would say, first of all, that I've always wanted, I don't want to say I've always wanted to write about Anwar Ibrahim. I have never always wanted to write about him or any politician. But since I got into writing as part of my research activities, I've always wanted to write about, large events, epic events, even, if you will, within so small a country as ours. If you don't quite believe that this is a small country and this is a very small state, you just have to look at what is happening in the world and see the kinds of repercussions, events in Gaza, for example, have on the rest of the world. Every day you'll see, either on YouTube or in the mass media or wherever, coverage of everything from the attacks on Gaza to the attacks on the students in the American universities. So Penang is not like that. It is a relatively small place. It's a relatively, I would say, free place. And for some of my friends, they say, this is the best place I could be living in. But anyway, leaving aside that, I've always wanted to write about, almost like epic events, not in a literary but fictional way, but just on subjects like Mahathirism. Mahathirism, which I coined as a word to refer to, as it were, the ideology of Mahathir when he was, in politics for the first round, up to the time when he actually retired. So there was Mahathirism. There was the political discontent in Malaysia beyond Mahathir, beyond his retirement the first time around. And the first time around, after he retired, there was a lot of discontent, bound up with Reformasi. Many of us here would remember that period. Many of us might have taken part in the activities of Reformasi. Others may not have. But those were the kinds of issues that I was interested in. And now we have Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim and the transformation of Malaysian politics, in Malaysia. Now, each of these books that I had written on tackle a subject that I never thought at any time that would be the last word on the subjects, right? I, never pretended to be able to write the last word. I was always hoping that I would be able to put out a book which other researchers could improve on, could actually engage with, and so on, right? I didn't see much point in writing on small and petty, political issues, even if one could finesse one's interpretation of them. I did my share of those kinds of writings, by the way, because the pressures of academic life required one very often to write articles and to publish them in different journals. I mean, you couldn't be publishing a book every few months, but you could presumably write an article of about 20, 30 pages and seek publication in different journals. And that's why, I had done that myself. One often had to write short essays, and these days, these essays are getting shorter because of social media pressure and because of the reluctance of a lot of people to read longer articles. I mean, if you think about it, it's become a bit, to me, a bit ridiculous to write things that are only 4 or 5 pages. A lot of readers would prefer you to reduce those to 1 or 2 pages. But what on earth can you really write about in serious, on serious topics if you were to reduce yourself to writing to that kind of a length, right? So to address such issues as the sudden eruptions in political economy in 1997, or to write about an unsuspecting judiciary that could not even protect itself, right? You had the judicial crisis in 1988. Or to talk about the systemic flaws of an electoral system, the disgraceful conduct of particular political parties, the biographical sketches of particular politicians, whether admirable or not, all these required at least substantial length and considerable research to be able to, come up with something decent that you not feel shy if people were to read them. I had also written a number of commentaries for magazines such as the Aliran Monthly. And for Malaysia Kini, I actually am very happy that I wrote for the very first issue of Malaysia Kini. And after that, I wrote several times for it, occasionally on Anwar Ibrahim and Mahathir's return to politics in 2015, 2016, all the way to 2018. In fact, I wrote a series of articles and, asked them to publish those articles as a series of 5 articles. The first was on Anwar. The second was on Dr. Wan Aziza, and then 3 others on Mahathir. Okay. Before that, during the Bersih events, just before the Bersih organizers organized their 5th rally, I gave them a series of 5 different essays on Bersih, each of them coming out one day, in the 5 days before Bersih 5 was actually held. So I feel that I have done my part too, trying to write shorter articles, commentaries, and discussions of issues that were important. Okay. Other events included the unbelievable East Asian crisis of 1997, the tragic fall of Anwar Ibrahim, the crude histrionics of UMNO figures, right? The undeserved demonization of the Chinese community by Khairi Jamaluddin and others, which actually led to the wholesale turn of the Chinese vote from UMNO, from BN, and which has not returned to any of these parties. So it was a very crucial event, right? And all the way, we might say, to the exciting emergence and the calamitous collapse of the first Pakatan Harapan government. Okay. Now, even during the dark days of the backdoor governments, right, including the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic, I saw Anwar's tenacity at work in politics. Right? I had some admiration for him, particularly when he was, a dissident student before, and then became a dissident before he joined UMNO. And thus, in later years, I wrote on the parlous condition of Malay politics, the crux of the present political situation, even up to today. The making of the humane economy, which expressed Anwar's hope, and the unrealized Mahathir to Anwar transitions of power that have brought so much anger and angst to the public. So those were, in some ways, the reasons and the circumstances that led me to write this particular book on Anwar. Right? The second question that has been often posed to me, and frankly, it is a question that has perplexed me, is this: what is the core of the book? Some people would ask as if I could simply give them what one might crudely call a bottom line assessment of the book. That is to say, people might come and say, don't tell me all these things that you have write about Anwar or Mahathir or whatever. Just tell me, bottom line, is the person you're writing about good, bad, or ugly, right? It is not so simple. Can one really write about somebody like Mahathir with his, 900 over page autobiography, or other kinds of subjects as controversial as Anwar Ibrahim, and come down to this simple bottom line assessment? Now, I cannot do that, nor do I want to do that. I've written a book that I hope my readers would read. I don't have a blog or social media platform that I can use to respond to readers who have these questions and other questions. But I would be happy and to respond to them if I find their comments appearing, at their own blogs or social media platforms. Now, it might be useful to say here that a good friend of mine said of my first book, Paradoxes of Mahathirism, an intellectual biography of Mahathir Mohamad, this friend said that if 50% of your readership think that you are pro-Mahathir, and the other 50% think that you are anti-Mahathir, you would have written a roughly impartial book, right? And so I would like to think that even for this book on Anwar, I don't worry about what the politicians say of the book. I don't think any one of them is here today for reasons best known to them. But for whatever reasons they have, if they either belong to one or the other camp, and I hope they roughly divide, equally, I would be happy, okay? But if we want to speak of the crux of this book, please allow me to quote Lytton Strachey at length from his wonderful little book of biographical sketches. The book is called Eminent Victorians. That means people who lived in the reign of Queen Victoria. I mean, we still have Queen Victoria's statue, outside the Chinese Recreational Club. So it's not entirely divorced from the world here. But anyway, this is what Strachey said in his biographical sketch of Florence Nightingale. I think for people of our generation, the Lady with the Lamb is relatively familiar. Quote, "Everyone knows the popular conception of Florence Nightingale, the saintly, self-sacrificing woman, the delicate maiden of high degree who threw aside the pleasures of a life of ease to succor the afflicted, the Lady with the Lamb, gliding through the horrors of the hospital at Scutari, and consecrating with the radiance of her goodness the dying soldier's couch. The vision is familiar to all. But the truth was different. The Miss Nightingale of fact was not as facile fancy painted her. She worked in another fashion and towards another end. She moved under the stress of an impetus which finds no place in the popular imagination. A demon possessed her. Now demons, whatever else they may be, are full of interest. And so it happens that in the real Miss Nightingale, there was more that was interesting than in the legendary one. There was also less that was disagreeable. That was agreeable, unquote. I'm happy to see Dr. Devraj appear, at this book launch, for his age and everything. We all know him very well. So I'm very pleased to see him here. Okay, here, every one of us knows the familiar conception of Anwar Ibrahim. Over 50 years, he was by turns the Malay nationalist student rebel, the Islamic radical motto of dakwah activism, the alleged organizer of the Baling demonstrations, the ISA detainee, the leader of the Anti-Societies Act campaign, the co-opted rising star of UMNO, the anointed heir apparent to Mahathir, the persecuted anti-corruption reformist, the reinvented dissident of Reformasi, the returned opposition leader, the inspiration of a reunified opposition, the symbolic force of the 2008 electoral tsunami, the repeatedly failed PM wannabe, and the thrice imprisoned threat to 3 prime ministers. This was Anwar Ibrahim. If I just sum it like this, I'm sure that it is a conception of Anwar Ibrahim that is familiar to all of us, right? There is not much to talk about these different facts. We can at least agree that he was, every one of those different personae. Not unlike his nemesis, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, though, Anwar donned so many personae. At critical moments, though, so unlike Mahathir, Anwar threw aside the option of a life of comfortable irrelevance to rouse the sleeping masses. The comfortable irrelevance refers to the option given to Anwar by Tun Daim Zainuddin just before Anwar was actually sacked. Tun Daim Zainuddin went to see him and said to him, "You have a choice. You can resign the position of deputy prime minister and go on to live whatever life you want, right? But you will no longer be in politics." And I would say to his credit and to the credit of all the people who, supported his dissident movements after that, he rejected that comfortable irrelevance. And that comfortable irrelevance, one feels even now, would have been, I think, fairly disgraceful. It might have been understandable, but for somebody of Anwar's stature and somebody with this little resume that I have just read out, right, it would have been, I think, quite unconscionable. So whether we liked it or not, he returned to his dissident roots, to his dissident, temperament. He went back to become a recalcitrant Malaysian, and he rebelled against the entire system. Okay. So he became a prisoner of conscience with a blackened eye, who spent actually in his entire career a total of 9 years of his prime political life, a lot of the time in solitary confinement. This was all before his royal pardon in 2018. Each time when he came out, he bided his time to return to politics and to spearhead a campaign for reform. Now that we know this précis of Anwar's career, would we say that the truth about Anwar was different? Which is why, in a way, I set out to write about Anwar, to try to go through the book, the different parts of Anwar's thinking, his ideas, his different campaigns, to try and flesh out some of these things and to put them together into what I hope is a coherent whole for readers to be able to follow, to be able to engage with, to disagree by all means, or to agree if they so wish, right? And what's the Anwar of fact? Neither as his opponents and his tormentors doubt him, nor as his allies and his supporters portrayed him. At a critical historical juncture, he moved under the stress of an impetus which finds no place in our common, ordinary, mundane political imagination. We can say that the thought of becoming prime minister had over the years mutated into a demon for Anwar. I mean, I use the word demon in the way that Lytton Strachey used it to describe what he thought possessed the Lady of the Lamp, right? There is no need to, impute other meanings to that. And possessed by that demon, Anwar worked under conditions that many of us would find very hard to imagine. And so it happens that in the real Anwar, there was arguably more that was interesting than in the legendary Anwar. But if you want to know who the legendary Anwar was, you would probably have to go and read other books and other publications on Anwar, many of them bearing titles that, put up Anwar in such a grandiose way that you can't help thinking that these were attempts to create a legend, even when Anwar was in jail. Now, the final question I would like to, deal with is also relatively simple. I mean, in what ways would this book be different from other books that are already written and published on Anwar? This book is, frankly speaking, not a true biography of Anwar Ibrahim. It gives a lot of attention to his ideas and his moves. And yet, he worked under the sustained rise of popular disobedience over a period of 25 years. You just try and recall, ever since, the 2nd of September, when Anwar was thrown out of his job and reformasi began, there have been waves and waves of dissident politics in this country all over these 25 years. There was a short period, during the first term, of Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi's reign, when there appeared to be a certain quiet. But this quiet came only just before the tsunami. And so for 25 years, it has gone on. And today, this sustained rise is still to be seen in many different ways, coming from PAS, coming from Bersatu, coming from wherever it is, people quarreling with one another over very small and, to me, quite unimaginative, scale. Okay. Apart from the sustained rise of popular disobedience, there was also the complete disfigurement of Malay politics. And with Malay politics entering a condition that I have termed the parlous condition of Malay politics, a condition of instability, uncertainty, and which has stayed with us today. If you think back, there was a time in our political history when the political terrain was very simple. There was a big Malay political party called UMNO, and it faced a small political party called PAS. I mean, small in a certain way, because PAS was relatively active in the East Coast states, for many years. But that roughly summed up Malay politics. UMNO taking care of PAS, and PAS unable to fight back. And if you take for an example, in the 1986, PAS only won one seat in parliament out of 70, I think, 6 seats that it competed against UMNO in. But today, look at Malay politics, right? Look at how divided Malay politics is. I am not trying to suggest here that there should be somebody who should, unite all the Malays. I mean, this sort of thing has never happened. And however these divisions are going to work out, it's going to be up to the general Malay populace and their politics and so on for the parlous condition to be resolved. So that was the second part of this context, if you will. And there was a third part too, something that I think many of us did not imagine. And it only happened to us when it happened before our eyes. And that is the growing importance of the politics of the Sarawakian parties, and to a lesser extent, the parties in Sabah. So if we take these three conditions together and put them into a context for Anwar's politics, we can see where he is today. He's prime minister. He came out after outmaneuvering his competitors, but only to emerge a relatively weak prime minister. Even today, we are so used to the figure of Mahathir Mohamad that we find it difficult to imagine a relatively weak, prime minister. And today, that is what, Anwar is. Well, I think that the point about all this is this: one cannot comprehend Anwar without understanding the politics of the past 25 years. And yet, one cannot understand the politics of the past 25 years without understanding Anwar. You might say that this is a dialectical relationship, and it takes considerable effort to try and weave out the contradictions and the things that agreed for both of them. But without doing these two at the same time, now looking at the politics of the 25 years, now looking at Anwar, and occasionally putting them on together, without doing all this, it would be very hard for us to understand the politics of Malaysia. Many years ago, the great historian of Britain, well, he wasn't a historian of Britain, he was a great British historian, E.H. Carr, mapped out, let's say, such a situation. He did so in his little book, What is History? And Carr said, and I quote, "What seems to me essential is to recognize in the great man an outstanding individual who is at once a product and an agent of the historical process, at once the representative and the creator of social forces which change the shape of the world and the thoughts of men." Unquote. Finally, I've been conscious that I should try to write so as to be accessible to my readers, particularly Malaysians. I hope I don't ask too much of readers beyond their understanding of English up to maybe Form 6 level, and a readiness to engage with the views and arguments presented. Perhaps that makes my book not so different from other books written in English, right? Well, mine is an academic book. I mean, people will say that. But it is at the same time, I think, a popular book. I haven't paid much attention to such things as theoretical issues, which used to upset many of my colleagues, especially especially when I tried to submit, the pieces I wrote to academic journals. I have tried to argue different points of views on almost every issue that I deal with in this book. Maybe that is somewhat different from other books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Koo, for his sharing of his thought on Anwar Ibrahim and his book. Listening to his talk, I was like immersing in a lecture back in USM like 30 years ago.
Don't know about that.
From back.
Let me introduce our two discussions to talk about the books. We have first discussion, Dr. Azmir Tayyip. He's an associate professor of political science at the Schools of Social Sciences, USM. He has done extensive research on political Islam, social movements, and local government politics, particularly in Indonesia and Malaysia. He's also a visiting research fellow at ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore and adjunct professor at Universitas Negeri Malang in East Java, Indonesia. He's the author of Islamic Education in Indonesia and Malaysia, Shaping Minds, Saving Souls, published in 2018. He's also the co-editor of Education and Power in Contemporary Southeast Asia, published in 2023, both by Routledge. Our second discussion is my colleague, Yong Pei Zung. She is a senior analyst attached to the Social Economics and Statistics programs at Penang Institute. She holds a Master's of Business from Swinburne University of Technology and a double degrees in arts, majors in political science and psychology, and commerce major in economics from the University of Melbourne. Her main research work includes gender studies with a special interest in the political representation of women as well as socio-economic issues of women, youth development, and minority marginalization. Who would like to start first? Maybe Dr. Azmil.
Right. Thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me to this book launch. Thanks everyone for coming as well. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So I'm actually glad to see that the book finally came out. Because Butek and I, we've been discussing this book for quite some years here in Penang and also in Tokyo. During the process of writing this book. So, and I remember one of the things that we talk about in this many discussions, who is actually is Anwar Ibrahim, right? I mean, this is one of the big questions, right? So, because you can hear from his talk just now, there are various iterations of Anwar Ibrahim, right, throughout these long years, right? The Islamist firebrand, the co-opted, UMNO, the prodigy, the heir apparent for Mahathir Muhammad, the persecuted political dissident, opposition leader, and the different hats, right? So I remember one of the discussion that we had. So who exactly, I mean, if we know that he wear different hats, right? So, and assume different persona in different phases of his life, right? Very colorful, very adventurous life. So I think that question is even more pertinent now, right? Because Anwar is the current Prime Minister of Malaysia. For the past, since 2022. So for those of us who are trying to figure out what he plans to do, his actions, right? His plans of action, his decision making, his thought process, and all that. Now, as Prime Minister, when he's actually in the position to do something meaningful, to do something substantive, right? When his action has repercussions, right? Can influence in the society, can make it better or can make it worse, right? So now I think it's even more pertinent, like who is exactly Anwar Ibrahim, right? So what kind of person what we can expect now that he is the Prime Minister? Right? So is he this Islamist firebrand, or is he this unreconstructed UMNO guy, or is he, I mean, any of these versions of him, right? So I think, for me, when I maybe it's not just me, but maybe perhaps some of you as well. When you read the book, maybe you have this in mind as well, right? Because I mean, we cannot help but to think of Anwar Ibrahim in contemporary context, right? Yeah. So look at him now. I mean, the kind of the things that he's doing, especially with we see how polarized our society is right now, right? His action, or maybe rather inaction, perhaps, can that be explained by these different versions of him, that we can find in this book, right? So because I think that brings at least me, to this question: can we actually use this book as a guide, perhaps, to look into this book, for a guide to sort of figure out, who is Anwar Ibrahim now, right? I think because it's fascinating to learn about, his definitely very tumultuous, life, especially in the past 25 years or 3 decades, right? I mean, if you can go back longer to 1970s, right, to these Abim years. It's fascinating to learn, and how this momentous events and these misfortunes and all these things have shaped who he is. Yeah. But at the same time, we also want to know, who is Anwar Ibrahim now, right? So, and it's, as someone who, I've never studied him closely, maybe not as closely as Butek, but it's also a question that's interesting to me as someone who studies political Islam, right? So, who study, and as we see now, with the rise of the far right, ethno-religious movements here, how, you can see all these conflagrations that we see now, the SOC issue, all these things, right? So for me, it's looking at Anwar Ibrahim as the leader, right? Someone's there to can perhaps provide a steady hand and the statesmanship and all this. So trying to, what kind of what version of Anwar Ibrahim that should be dealing with all these things, So so for me, that's the kind of question that's in the back of my mind, when I'll be the first to admit that I haven't read the book page cover to cover. It is about 400 plus pages. So it took a bit of commitment to read the book, but I did read skim through, especially the one on the parlous state of the Malay politics, which interests me quite a bit. So, but for me, that what comes to mind, is the contemporary politics now, which I'm sure that all of you also, have these burning questions as well, So as we look to him, see the buck stops at him, right? He's the prime minister, right? So, and what is he doing to deal with all these issues that we have, right? The kind of the cleavages, the tensions, right? The deep distrust, and all these things that we see, that we find in our society now. So we look up to him, to deal with this, and then what kind of what version of Anwar Ibrahim will show up in dealing with this. So I think at least that's the question that I have, personally. Maybe some of you as well. Maybe that we can open that to question. Yeah. But I do recommend those of you who haven't bought the book, please do so here. We have here copies here at the desk here, so I'm shipping for the book now. So, so no commission, of course. So maybe perhaps free lunch for Butek one of these days. But I think, like, the book, as I said, is ultimately it's a breath of fresh air. Yes. When you look at the corpus, the arrays of books on Anwar Ibrahim that's on the market, I think the past years, right? Because him as this highly polarizing figure, right? Anwar Ibrahim. It's for many, it's just either you hate him or you love him, you admire him, you adore him, or you hate him with all your guts, right? So you have usually a lot of these kind of books that you find, in the on the market. So I think to have this book, Butek's book, that provides this kind of especially intellectual biography of Anwar Ibrahim, and the book that is rigorously researched as what you can expect from Butek. I mean, for those of you who have read his Paradoxes of Mahadirism, I mean, that is still a seminal work for anyone who's studying Mahathir, right? Or studying the time of Mahathir, the 22 years, I mean, the first period of Mahathir's prime ministership. I mean, that is still the reference, the gold standard for studying Mahathir, right? So I mean, when we pick up this book, when people pick up this book, I mean, that's the kind of expectation that people have, so the kind of work, the rigor, the meticulousness that you can expect from Butek. But as I said, this is a breath of fresh air to provide this sort of, I think correct me if I'm wrong, right? It's sort of, I think like Butek has kind of err on the side of the hope, the hope, right? The hopeful side in a way, right? I mean, I remember we have this discussion as well. I don't know if you can remember or not. We talk, because I'm a bit pessimistic, not to the point of cynicism, but I guess maybe some healthy skepticism, I guess. But I think Butek is more optimistic, So when looking at Anwar Ibrahim and this prospect of having Anwar Ibrahim in power and for him to affect positive change in our society, right? In Malaysian politics, I remember. But for me, it's as someone who studied political Islam, I'm kind of holding back a bit because I feel that there's a lot more to it than just but perhaps that can be another forum for that as well. But then yes, do get the book if you haven't yet done to do it. Yeah, so then I think I already have more time for Q&A later on, so we can pick up some of the points that I've brought up in my talk. So I'll pass the page. Thank you.
Thanks, Asmail. And hello, can you hear me? Yes. So thanks, Asmail, and thanks, Dr. Koo, for your talk, and thanks, Dr. Tan, for the very kind introduction. So I will also be the first to admit that I'm not an Anwar scholar, so I have not actually studied Anwar, his life, or his early politics in detail. So reading Dr. Koo's book is very fascinating for me personally, especially when it comes to Anwar's early years and the history of his foray into politics. So I think both Dr. Koo and Asmail talked about how Anwar is a chameleon in many ways. So his charisma, his leadership adapts to whatever situation that he will find himself in. And I think Dr. Koo outlined that very clearly in his book when he goes through Anwar's successes, his turmoil, all his life, what he has faced. You can see the different facets of Anwar coming into play to adjust to whatever situation that he's put into. I especially like one line in the book where Dr. Koo says that Anwar, by nature, he's a doer, he's an orator, he's a politician, he's an intervener. So Anwar, in nature, he is never passive. You will never see a passive Anwar. You may not agree with some of the actions that he takes towards certain things, but you cannot say that he is a passive person that does not do anything. Even in prison, he is trying his best to get all his messages out there to even rejuvenate his supporters. So he's always been a doer, and I really find that quite fascinating to read about. And the other thing about the book that struck me is when Dr. Koo talks about Anwar's economics. So Anwar, even as a finance minister during his finance minister days, he's always advocated for a humane economy. So he talks a lot about education, public health, poverty alleviation, redistribution, welfare efficiency. So all of this has always been in his economic policies per se. Maybe they come around in different forms, but that's one thing that he always focuses on. And the message of Anwar's anti-corruption stance also comes across quite strongly in the book. And that's another thing I want to mention later when it comes to like today's politics, right? When you talk about Anwar's stance against corruption, it was his stance against corruption that also led to his sacking back in the day, and basically caused him to go through all the things that he has went through for the past 25 years. I think Anwar's, what do you call it? Do you want to call it suffering, or maybe his journey and how it interrelates with the state of Malaysian politics? That's also something that's very clearly outlined in Dr. Khoo's book. So actually, not that I want to do the shilling thing again, but really if you want to understand Anwar, and also if you want to understand what has happened since 1998, the state of Malaysian politics, and how Anwar Ibrahim as the person, as an opposition leader, as a prime minister candidate, as the prime minister even, how has he played into the events since 1998? I think this book really explains it and outlines it very clearly. And also the other thing that struck me was what Dr. Khoo called the populist reimagination of the society. That kind of began with the Reformasi in 1998, the Reformasi movement, which kind of fell aside again after Anwar went into prison. And you have that period of relatively stable politics per se when Abdullah Badawi came into power and the opposition suffered really tremendous losses in the election. And then we have Bersih coming into the picture, and all the mass rally movement of Hindraf, where Malaysians, the citizens, are beginning to see that perhaps the political hegemony isn't that much of a great thing for Malaysian politics and Malaysian society. So all these big civil society movements that kind of rejuvenate the Malaysians' political stances and political thinking, because for a while there, people were choosing stability, right? So some people really see the UMNO hegemony as a stability as well, because you have UMNO, you have Barisan Nasional, and you have UMNO, and you have MCA and MIC, but it's not debatable that UMNO holds the power in the coalition, and the stability kind of comes from there. Like nobody is making any noise, nobody is rising up against Barisan Nasional. So hence you have that so-called political stability, right? But when Malaysian citizens come to think about a world without UMNO, perhaps, or a government, Malaysia, where perhaps Barisan Nasional isn't the governing coalition per se. So I think all of these movements, all of the civil society movements, civil society protests actually plays a very, very big role leading into 2008. And I think Dr. Khoo would agree with me because that's clearly outlined in his book as well. So from 2008 onwards, then we start seeing perhaps a different Malaysia, a Malaysia where Barisan Nasional is no longer at the helm. And I think we realized that in 2018. And basically, this is where Malaysian politics become, I don't know what's the best word to say it, because I've, living through it, it's like this never-ending cycle of, I don't know who's the prime minister when I wake up. It's like being back in Australia again. Like you wake up the next day, oh, my prime minister is no longer this guy, it's this other guy. And what happened overnight? So you get that kind of political instability, yet it's like the most interesting times in Malaysian politics since independence, per se, right? And I think Dr. Khoo put the retelling of the political turmoil of 2020 until now, the situation now, it was very, very clearly outlined. So for those who want to really understand what happened since the Sheraton move, or what happened to perpetuate the Sheraton move, the book has it all in clear detail, with interviews, with quotes, and you really get the whole story of all of it. And in the middle of it, Anwar's tenacity and his role is also very clearly there. So you see how Anwar is in the situation that he's put into, and tenacious is really a correct word to describe him during this period, because all his political maneuvering, all his ways and means to try and get his to get back the majority of the parliamentarians supporting him, he really, really worked so hard to kind of come back into power, right? I mean, everyone remembers the I've got the numbers thing. How many times has that happened? Twice, right? And before that also, there has been instances where he claimed he has the numbers. So he really, really worked very, very tirelessly. So again, you cannot say that he's passive. Even when all the chips are down, he's still rebelling, he's still trying ways, he's still finding ways. So this tenacity, really, I have to say, I really admire him for, because I would have, for me personally, I would have given up. I mean, after my first jail stint, right? I mean, he had a really cushy job at the Georgetown University. He was doing well. You know, he was giving talks. He was a lecturer. He had a good life, right? He could have continued on the way of being an academic and just live his life. Nobody is going to accuse him of anything. Nobody is going to throw him into jail. But he came back. He came back to fight for what he thinks is a better Malaysia for Malaysians. He didn't give up. So I think Dr. Khoo said it just now, right? You could choose to kind of fade into obscurity, but a better life. But he didn't take that as well. He came back and he had to go to jail again. So, you know, that's that. But finally, so as we all know, he managed to triumph, even though it was looking kind of precarious for a while there. Like, you don't know which way the pendulum is going to swing, but it swung his way. And after 25 years, Anwar Ibrahim made it as the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So it was a very, very long wait, but he's here finally. And one of the last chapters of Dr. Khoo's book, he talked a bit about this as well. Actually, talked a lot about this, the parameters of a new governance. So the book really went into the Madani government in the early days. What is Anwar's vision of a Madani government? So he really dissects the Madani vision, what he wants to achieve. So again, Anwar stresses on the humane economy, you know, redistribution, welfare efficiency, and compassionate development. So my personal kind of view about this is that, have we seen anything of Anwar's humane economy? So that was kind of the thing that was going through my mind as I was reading as well. So has our education improved? Public education improved? I wouldn't say so. Has public health improved? Access to public health? Maybe, maybe not, because I do know that there has been a lot of efforts to put more mobile clinics in the rural areas. So maybe that's more accessibility for the rural folks. Poverty alleviation. So, you know, we have the Rama schemes. We have the basically for the low income families, they get their money to help support their living. And so redistribution, have we seen any of it? Welfare efficiency, also a question. And of course, compassionate development, that also remains to be seen, right? But one thing that I kind of want to speak about, which I spoke about earlier, is Anwar's stance against corruption. You know, he's so strongly anti-corruption. But looking at the situation now, he put a man who's being charged with corruption as his deputy prime minister. And you also have various figures who had their charges dropped without even going through court or halfway through court. So that really poses as a question to all Malaysians, right? So where is Anwar exactly at when it comes to anti-corruption? Because that has always been his mantra since he entered politics, since he became deputy prime minister. Anwar has always been anti-corruption, 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 right? So that is kind of my question, I guess, as when I was reading this book, because his anti-corruption message was so strong throughout the entire book. And that's backed up by the people who knows him, by the people who has worked with him. Everybody says that Anwar is very against corruption. But when it comes to us today, then we think further, right? So how far does his stance go? What is Anwar's version of anti-corruption per se? Of course, we all do know that it's very complicated, it's very delicate, right? There are many, many reasons going on behind what Anwar does, what he did. And we may never, as the common person, as a common Malaysian, maybe we will never be privy to those reasons why, who knows? But the unity government today, some may argue that it's pretty stable, although the other part of it, some would say that is actually very precarious. So I guess there's also a question that I have for the audience today, like, do you think the unity government is precarious or is it stable? And how would Anwar maintain the stability of this government? What must Anwar do? Which version, like again, as all our other speakers have said, which version of Anwar is going to stand up? Going ahead, he still has how many years to his premiership? Three and a half years. So which version of Anwar is going to lead us? Yeah. But yes, buy the book.
Thanks, Pei Zung, for her analysis and observation. In the past few days, she has been reading the books every day. When I knocked on the office, I saw she was like flipping the books in retail and taking notes. And yeah, Dr. Cook, would you like to respond to anything from the discussion, or we can open up for the audience to ask some questions?
Okay, I'll just make a few remarks in response to what Dr. asked me and Ms. Yong have said. Right? And the first thing that Asmil said was that we had many discussions of Anwar Ibrahim, before, and unfortunately, I don't remember very much what we discussed. But to take you at what you said just now, when you mentioned that Anwar was formerly a firebrand Islamist student, and you think that that is probably perhaps the most definitive point about Anwar in politics today, and you're not sure about how he's either behaving now or trying to work out his politics in Malaysia. I think it is a complicated situation if one wants to just focus on his Islam. I'm not very sure now what exactly you would say Anwar's Islam is today. If you want to say he's an Islamist, you might have to try and distinguish him from other Islamists. There are many people who call themselves Islamists, from people who are fairly moderate to those who are fairly extreme. And I think that you would have to be fairly accurate in locating Anwar's Islam. I'm not sure that that is that easily done. The other thing about his Islam is that it has also undergone many changes over the years. You cannot take the Anwar of the 1970s, 74, 70 to 74, that period, and say that that is the definitive Anwar that I would always want to talk about. Because over the years, as he was part of UMNO, part of government, and as he became the anointed successor, as they like to call him, he had to change. In the chapter that I wrote on Anwar's Islam in this book, I tried to say that if you look at Anwar's attitudes towards Islam, he had some, definite ideas about what Islam might constitute. Politically, he always came down to ideas about Islam, excuse me, Islam being important to democracy, to anti-corruption, to the empowerment of civil society, and all this. This he's always said. And when you take these sorts of things and you compare to other non-Islamic ideas about such issues, I don't think you will find very great differences between the two. He may say certain things, he may quote Islamic scripture, but he could very much quote Shakespeare to support himself in this situation. Excuse me, let me just drink more. I started to say in that book, on the chapter on Islam, that he began with Islam as the fount of ideas to combat the what was the term? Decolonization. I said the first part was really to combat decolonization. And if you look at his speeches when he was ABIM president, most of his speeches came down to that in different situations from different angles. He would be talking about how the present government after independence had not gone sufficiently into the process of decolonizing the society. And that was the time when Anwar would tell his ABIM followers, go and read, Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. Go and read, this other people. I forget the titles right now, but many of these kinds of, sort of radical, not particularly radical in any politically established way, but just intellectually, radical, coming up with new ideas. And that was what he was saying. But after he went to prison and came out the first time, I think his Islam was, sort of reoriented to some extent. He no longer talked so much about decolonization. He was in with the DAP, with the civil society groups to attack the Anti-Societies Act Amendment Bill. And he was using Islam to talk about civil society, to talk about why it was important to open up these areas, to allow for the freedoms of expression, assembly, and these other things, right? And then when you came to another phase of his politics, when he was in UMNO, and he was almost immediately after that the UMNO youth president, in which capacity he always had to give a speech at the UMNO General Assemblies. And you found that, when he talked about Islam in those periods, the Islam that he mentioned was a different kind of Islam. It was Islam for the purposes of trying to, manage what he felt was relatively successful development under Mahathir. Of course, there were times when he came across situations where he had no choice but to say some things about, problems that faced the government. For example, the BMF crisis, right? The Bumiputra Malaysian finance crisis with the killing of the accountant who was sent to Hong Kong. And he had to talk about issues in those ways. And strangely, as I recall, for one of the subjects, or for one of the years before the general election of 1986, he spoke quite a lot about Islam. And he talked about how it was important for a party like UMNO to be treading, in the lines of Islamic discourse, etc. But the following year, he actually dropped Islam from his speech almost entirely, except for quoting one or two things that he mentioned, which really had very little to do about Islamic discourses then. And the situation between 1986 and 1987 was that in 1986, he was part of UMNO trying to win a general election against PAS. And in 1987, he was part of Team A trying to defeat Team B in UMNO. And as a result of all these kinds of things, his Islam took, many different reorientations. Now, I think one would be hard put to say that Anwar, when you come down to it, let's say bottom line, which Islamist was he? Which Islam did he truly belong to? Did he truly promote? Because in the fourth phase that I mentioned, when he came out, and he was leading the Pakatan Rakyat, then later on Pakatan Harapan also, he began to use Islam to fight autocracy, to fight dictatorship, to fight for democracy. And in fact, he broadened his fights beyond Malaysia, to talk about the end of the Suharto dictatorship in Indonesia, to talk about the rise of Erdogan in Turkey, to talk about the problems of Islamic dictatorship or dictatorships under leaders who proclaim themselves to be Islamic in the different countries. And he said, for this country, we had similar kinds of problems. So we needed to use, if you were talking about Islam, you had to use it to try and project, what you wanted to say about democracy, about empowerment, about civil society, and being anti, autocracy. Okay. Now, if you come to the present stage, what would he say of Islam? I haven't really written on this stage. The stage when he became, prime minister, and may have to think about Islam all over again to try and pull out different things about Islam that he wants to use to address the social and economic problems in Malaysia. But he has said that many of the things that I discussed in the section on this humane economy is that many of these things you can find support from, Islamic, scripture, Islamic texts, Islamic thinkers, and so on. So I don't know whether that's an, adequate response to Asmil's talk about, this Islamic facets of Anwar. I mean, apart from Islam, there are all these other things that I talked about, Anwar in the book, and I think that one would have to go through what I said. I hope I have given some sense of the changes that took part, in Anwar's mind, in the way that he talked to people, in the way that he tried to design the political discourses for elections. You couldn't say that everything was the same, but you couldn't say that everything was always different. And the problem is to have to try and work out in many different ways to see where he has been consistent, to see where he might have been inconsistent, to see where he might have even been opportunistic. I mean, these are all possible. And if I've written a book about these earlier parts of Anwar's career leading up to, let's say about, when was this, October, about August of last year. This was only a few months after he became prime minister. It was difficult to get into a lot of details. I do say that, with regard to what Peyong has said about the humane economy, that in fact, most of the things he began with when he became prime minister were addressed to the issues that he had brought up when he discussed the humane economy, that he thought he had to do much more for the B40 as the category is known. And then maybe after that, the, what do they call it? The M40 or whatever it is, before he would come to deal with, the top 20%. And his plans for the top 20% would roughly fall under, perhaps stricter taxation, more anti-corruption, and so on. But he put out in the budget speech that he actually took from the earlier prime minister and did some, changes here and there. Most of the allocations that he mentioned were addressed to the B40s and the people who were really more disadvantaged. And he spoke of other groups as well. He spoke of single mothers. He spoke of the youth who were unemployed. He spoke about the people who were in what he called the gig economy. And he spoke of many people of these kinds of social statuses, right? People that you and I would immediately not associate with because, we are not anywhere near their position. But I don't think that it was sheer opportunism. I don't think it was just political, convenience for him to keep talking about these people and to put into practice some of the things that he has done since he became prime minister. For all that we know, some of the, initiatives that he put out under this Rahma thing, right? The Rahma menu, the Rahma this, that, to help people because of the inflation. We may think that it is insufficient because many of us, frankly, when we talk about inflation, we want to talk about inflation in very big terms. We want to talk about how to manage inflation on a national scale. But if you are the prime minister, just come into power and you are still relatively weak and you want to have some demonstration effect, to show for what you have done, you may be better off doing some of this, small things that address the needs of the, people who are below, okay? Beyond that, you can start to do other things. He has only been prime minister for 1.5 years. I am not trying, as I've said once just now before, to apologize for Anwar Ibrahim. I don't think I need to do that. I don't think he needs me to apologize for him, but I do think that one can have some sense of understanding, some empathy for what he's trying to do under very difficult circumstances, right? And some of the things that he might have tried to do or he would have liked to do, don't forget, are things that have to be done by his ministers, his deputy ministers, and the bureaucracy under them. And if they didn't do them, it is one thing to say, these are all useless people, okay? These appointees don't deserve the salaries they get. They don't deserve the positions they are in, which may be true for some of them, right? Or else you can say that since the buck stops with Anwar, we should all blame Anwar for everything, which I think is not the sort of situation that would be, really appropriate. I mean, I don't think he has the kind of power that Mahathir had after 1990 for about 6.5 years, from 1990 to, up to 1997, Mahathir was unchallenged, right? He was really as powerful as you could get in Malaysia. He could get the royalty to be charged in court if he wanted to. And in those years, Mahathir could get things done. If he didn't like certain things, he could probably immediately say no, and people would have to stop, or he would do something else. But if you look at Anwar now, how is he going to come out over the SOX issue, over educational issue, over other kinds of issues, and simply say, stop, nobody talks like this anymore from tomorrow, okay? Because the guy who is saying these things, the guy who's been creating the problems for a lot of people, is a fairly strong member of a coalition partner whom, unfortunately, he desperately needs to hang on to. I'm not sure whether he can still remain in power if, for whatever reason, one or more of his coalition partners pull away, right? And that goes for also what Pei Yong said about anti-corruption. It was true that when he came to power, he said anti-corruption. And he has continued to say that. And he has, I don't know whether he has done it or whether he has got other people to do it. I mean, people will say anytime these things happen, it's got to be Anwar behind, the people who do these things. But I don't know. Is the MACC really so, Anwar driven? Perhaps it is. Perhaps it's not. But I do know that the MACC has, served notices to Anwar's 2 children, right? 2 sons, to ask them to declare, their assets and so on. And they say, no, it is Mahathir who is the true target. Well, if it is so, that is very good. But it is up to Anwar to show that he can, do something out of this within, the rules. I was going to say a rules-based context, but this phrase has become almost a dirty phrase given what has happened on the world stage. So just to say within our, legal system. And if you want to refer to Zahid Hamidi, I don't think a lot of people are happy that he has got a DNA, right? I don't think people are at all happy at the other dismissals of corruption suits. We don't know yet what will happen with the Najib case. All these are real problems. But I tend to think that rather than simply blame Anwar for either not doing enough or not wanting to do anything or not finding the things, the proper ways to deal with these things, I tend to think that, actually he's in a bit of a jam, right? And I don't know what will happen, as Peyong says, in the next 3.5 years. Perhaps we may find him, actually maneuvering for more space, maneuvering for more power. And if he succeeds, he might be able to do something different from what is happening now. If not, I'm not sure, what is going to happen. I was going to say that maybe the best way is to conclude by, quoting another, guy from Britain. This was Enoch Powell, a very conservative politician, who said that actually much of politics, when it reaches its heights, should be terminated, right? Because otherwise it will end in disaster. That is the actual nature of politics itself.
Okay. Now we are 5:27. Actually, I would like to open up to the floor, but I think I would like to invite a questions that not been mentioned before or analyzed before. Any question that you think that not been answered, you would like to say something that is different from what have been talked by Dr. Koo and the discussion. Any one particular question? If not, please buy the book and continue the discussion by writing to Malaysia Kini and invite Dr. Koo to respond. Okay, I believe the books will contribute to a positive change in Malaysia with a better understanding of our Prime Minister Anwar. The question is Anwarism in the making? Like Dr. Koo said about his book, it is not the last word of the subject. With this, I would like to end our book launch, and you may continue the discussion with author after this. Thank you. Please buy the books. Thank you.